Okay, welcome to presentation number 3 on this coaches off-season CPD program. Great response to number 1 and 2, so thank you very much for that. Previously, we spoke about developing the actual session itself and the design in the training session and outcomes you get from it. Then we spoke a bit about periodization, like a couple of weeks ago, about periodization of the training week and how you can get the most out of your training week for different sessions and different focuses. Today, I'm going to speak about something quite close to my heart, but also something that's been really topical in the last 2 or 3 weeks around developing individual programs and how we do that, especially within a team environment with limited resources and limited staff, etc. So we're going to speak a lot about how we get the most out of each individual, but more importantly, what we're looking at and how we're reflecting, how we're reviewing, and what sort of stuff we're putting in for them, for individual players. So hope you enjoy episode 3. After this, I pass the baton on to Kieran and Joe for some stuff around setting up a team tactically. So there'll be a little bit of a break from me, but yeah, enjoy number 3, and yeah, I hope you like it. Okay, I'm just going to share the screen now with the presentation. So hope you can see that well, and then we'll just start from the beginning. Yeah, okay, cool. So developing individual programs, presentation 3 of this coach's CPD period. We say off season. I've heard that it's gone back down to lockdown a little bit in Ireland, so apologies to hear that, but great opportunity to upskill again and reflect and keep learning as a community. So what we're going to do today, we're going to discuss the individual programs, and we're going to look at like where to start. So how do we start initiating these individual programs? Because I'm sure even if you haven't branded it as individual programs, there's still stuff that you're doing that constitutes as working on the individual and on their development at whatever age. And we'll talk a little bit about the different ages. But there's a two-pronged attack to this that I feel. So one is we're going to speak about the job essentials and making sure that every player, more importantly, every position that you have within your setup has a job spec that they are required to do. And that's how you get more objective on players' performance, on players that fit certain roles, etc., etc. And then we're going to speak about actually implementing individual learning plans and having like bespoke development plans really for every player to take ownership of, to really work on within the training structure. We'll then move on to how we then implement those individual programs. So doing the individual work or the unit work, whether it's physical, whether it's unit, tech, tac, psych, social, whatever it may be, and then how we get those individual programs within team sessions as well. Something that, you know, we miss completely. We always say, yeah, well, we do our 15 minutes of individual practice where we let players go off and do it, fine, but what are they getting in the team session? Is that just a generic session put on to just improve a generic thing, or are we looking at real specific individual things within the session? And then we're going to look at how, you know, we should review individual programs and then potentially change them once someone progresses and does well on their program, or whether they don't, or whether they still need constant work on certain things. But all that will come a little bit clearer as we go through, hopefully. All right, so the first one is determining the individual program, but looking more around the job essentials. So in my opinion, every position must have a job spec, you know, and I'm very fortunate enough to learn this from, you know, Chris Ramsey here at QPR, but it makes complete sense. You go to your day job and you have a job spec and something that you have to do to fulfill your job. When we say to someone you're going to play in midfield, we expect them to be able to do excellent catching high ball. They say in Gator, for example, catching high ball, get box to box, chip in with some scores, defend well in the middle of the park. But actually, do we coach them, or do we just expect them to come in with these? So this is what this is going to try and decipher a little bit more. In terms of ages then, so anyone, I think, and this more comes from the academy program that I work with here, you know, in terms of the age groups, I think under 15, each position and each player will have a job spec based on their position. All right. Now that's not set in stone, because you might have players that change positions or can do 1 or 2 positions. So their program might be slightly different. As a general rule, by under 15, you're looking at kind of nailing down a position and having a job spec. I think from under 12s to under 14s in what we call the growth year, and movement refinement, we call it here in the pyramid, you're looking at area spec. So if you think someone's going to be a midfield player, whether they're going to be more attacking, whether they're going to be more defensive, whether they're going to be box to box or D to D, however you want to frame it, then you give them the competencies and the job roles to be able to fulfill all those areas. If you think someone's going to be a forward type player, but you're not sure whether he might be an inside forward or a wing forward, then you have an area spec that covers all of those things. So the movement has to be good. They have to be able to make out to in runs. If they can't and they operate more centrally, then maybe they're going to be more of an inside forward. Can they score, basically, or are they better at assisting? They're the sort of questions that you're asking, but you're going to teach them that general area. And then the flip side is the defending. Now, you will have certain kids who will naturally fulfill certain roles at young ages, but as a rule, you want to teach them as much as they can, so you give them the best chance to specialize later on. And then below, under 12s, you know, coach them everything, coach them all the movements, coach them all the techniques, coach them basic roles and responsibilities all over the park, let them play everywhere, and just see where let's just see where they gravitate to and where they get good at. Okay, looking a little bit more specifically then around the job spec. So I've just put this together, a cornerback one, which is similar to the one that the boys did at London. But I just wanted to go into a little bit more detail for this purpose. You can show the player this. I think it's good you show the player this. Normally you would just have the things in bold, so you'd have the topics. But I think it's good to show the player this and let them understand the detail that goes into every part of the job spec. So we've got as a cornerback, fullback, whatever man marker, you've got defending 1v1, which is number one. Now notice that with all of the job specs and all of the reviews that we're going to come on to and all the creating of the individual programs, if it's a defensive type player, then I always put all the out of possession things or categories at the top, because number one, they're going to be judged on being a defender. If it's an attacking type player, or some midfielders, centre forward definitely, maybe some midfield players, you will put the in possession tasks at the front, or in possession categories at the front. So it's all about where the emphasis is going to be for that individual. But we've got here, so defending 1v1, so stopping the turn, man's got a back to play to you, how good are you at stopping the turn? You're talking about body position, so body shape, defending principles, nice and low. We call it getting into a surf position, but defending nice and low. Talk about angle of approach, so if someone's running at you or you're not tight, how are you going to approach them? What's your angle is? Can you get there fast but slow down fast as well, so you can get in a good position to be able to react to them? Can you then make the play predictable? So by your body shape, can you then force them into a position where your teammates know that you're going to be able to win the ball in a certain area? Can you delay? Can you deny? We talk about pokes. So in football, we talk about pokes because you're poking with the foot, but same applies in Gaelic. Can you get a hand on the ball? When's the right time to get a hand on the ball to win the ball? And they're the sort of details you're going in with 1v1 defending. I've got on here interceptions as well. So timing as the ball's in transit, good timing to intercept, when and where, the golden questions, and getting good contact on the ball. So you either retain possession or you get it in a good area where we've got a good chance of winning second ball. Talk about supporting the first defender or in team function. So if you're not the person getting direct pressure on the ball, what is your shape like supporting the first defender? Again, what's your body position like, taking the shape of the first defender? So are you in line with their inside shoulder? So they're showing them inside. Are you now creating that body position to be able to take the ball off them? Can you do a job and a half? So and I think in Gaelic is very, very prevalent for this. People just sticking to their man and saying, well, my man didn't score. But if your mate gets beat, as a defender, first defender, you've got to be in a position to be able to go and affect the ball and to be able to deny the ball going to your man or make it at least difficult in a 2v1. And then we talk about denying space. So talking about really protecting the red zone as an individual within a two or within a bigger unit. I've got here catching high ball, so judging the flight of the ball, the timing, the jumping ability. So now you're talking about the physical aspect, which you speak about. Can they actually jump? What's their height like? Catching the ball at its highest point and then avoiding contact from the opposition in the air, more from a safety perspective, really. So then you might be looking at the details of giving the opponent a little nudge, a subtle nudge that's not going to be a foul, so that when you're airborne, they're not in balance to be able to get good pressure on you. Sort of details you're going into with these job specs. Then I've got simple movement to receive. So we start to look at in possession, especially on kickouts, creating obvious supporting angles, but also when the ball's being recycled, or what we call playing around the arc, obvious supporting angles to receive the ball, good depth of angle, and double movements. We probably don't need to talk about 7-to-1 movements, which we talk about higher up the pitch, but we're talking about double movements. So the ability to lose a man and to be able to receive the ball with adequate enough time and space to be able to play out. And then we've got hand and kick passing, potentially mainly short and medium. We don't need the outside of the boot diag for the cornerback. I mean, if you've got it in the locker, it's a good tool. But in the main, you're looking at confident off right and left over short and medium distances. The type of pass is going to be, we call it a 75 in soccer or in football over here, but inside of the boot, a good, reliable, consistent bat on the ball. And you're going to know under pressure it's going to stay reliable and get to the man. So that's kind of a little job spec I put together. But you guys can play around with things a little bit more and get players to come up with different job specs who play in that position. You guys can come up with it as management team. We got good buy-in when we did it at London with the players. Kieran and Joe did it over a weekend back in Ireland. So there's lots of different things that you can go with these job specs, but I would say that the staff need to be able to have quite end sign off and autonomy on making sure this detail's in there. So then coming away from the job spec, then the other pronged attach, which is going to be reliant on the job spec to a degree. So I always think the job spec is like the starting point for anything. What do we want our players to be able to do to be successful? You've then got the more specific, I call them individual learning plans, but they can be called individual action plans. We call them with London individual development plans, they're called. I've seen them around. So these is an actual player specific individual action plan, what they need to get better or what they need to make even better than that to be a super strength. And we always do a 4-corner approach. And this is where you go into a little bit more detail on what you're going to shine the light on. But please do not let them forget the job spec at all times. The job spec is the thing that's going to get them over the line in games. So just a quick example that I put together here. Let's move my face out the way. So looking at the cornerback again, but talking about a specific player, no one in mind, but just something I put together. So I've put technical, needs to improve stopping the turn and timing of interceptions, and needs to master the basic instep pass of the both right and left. So you can see this person's probably at a fairly beginner level of a fullback cornerback. So their main thing is to be able to improve stopping the turn and defending 1v1 and their timing of interceptions and the basic instep pass. From a tactical perspective, we want them to get better at supporting the first defender with better supporting angles and improve double movements to receive the ball. So again, you can see how this job spec falls into it. Now, if someone was good at double movements, then you'd be taught, you probably wouldn't even have that on there. Or you would say, make your movement even more effective to be able to create space for someone else, for example. So you can see how you can start to tweak these over time. I've got physicals, so need to improve specific foot pattern and agility and working 1v1. So linking into stopping the turn. So need to, work with someone where you're defending man on his back and you're staying with the man, basically, trying to defend in 1v1. I've put improved power. So now I'm looking at specifics in the data that we've got and the testing results. So we want the squat jump to go above 35 centimeters. That's the target. And then I've put improved 10-meter sprint time, which is less than 1.5 seconds, which is a good time. And I've put in there make a super strength. So we need to make sure that if someone's good at something and it fits into their job spec, we don't lose that. And that becomes something that we keep working on over time. And then psychosocial, I've put communication when supporting the first defender. So are you talking to your mate when he's pressing and you're the second defender? Show him line, keep him out the red zone, to bring him inside if you're higher up the pitch because we've got bodies there. And then I've said bravery as well. So getting good blocks in what we call the red zone, the shooting area, to try and deny scores and deny goals. So now we'll come on to implementing a player's ILP. So the first thing for me is education, to not only the staff, because a lot of this stuff you would have heard of in different ways, but it's just formulating it together. but it's also education to the player, explaining the ILP and sitting down and showing them an ILP of them and having their own bespoke program or something to focus on just gives them confidence and thinks, wow, this person's invested in me. Doesn't matter if he's not starting or she's not starting every week with senior teams, etc. But now there's a plan to get that person better and into the team, ideally, and get players involved in creating them. So at London, we had a thing that it was player led, but coach facilitated. I've seen both. At QPR, it's practically coach led and then player reflection on it. I think it has to be a mixture of the two. I think the coach has to provide the detail of what they want their players to be able to do, and then the player has to then understand it, come up with the detail if possible, and you keep probing and probing until you basically have to step in and give them the answers. You always use these as the only reporting structure. So when you're doing any reviews and reports, instead of you just going off tangent and doing something completely irrelevant, if you have the job spec and the players' ILPs, and we're going to talk about this in a minute, then you know that we're going to grade them on these things. And if they're not doing these things well, there's no way they can be performing well or being successful. There's no point talking about the fullback who runs up the pitch and scores a goal a game, which is great, chipping in a goal, if you're conceding 5 goals and their basic 1v1 defending is poor. So you have to get a good balance on that. And then the other thing is when you're implementing them, okay, brilliant, you've come up with these things, you must implement them into the training schedule. So they must be a part of the regime. Otherwise, players are going to say, well, I haven't had a chance to work on it. And you're going to say, well, you haven't improved, and et cetera, et cetera. So here's just an example of the skipper we had at London, blacked out name, although you can probably just make out what it is. So you can see visually how we then made it a bit more appealing to the player, to the basic one that I just had on the screen. So you've got the badge, you've made it a bit more official, you've got a picture of the player, which the players did this. So the players created this. We had the template of the mission statement, the super strength and the 4 corners. And then the players then filled it in. We then had a meeting with the player, and then it became a conversation. Well, actually, yeah, I agree with that, but this might be more relevant to you. Or, yeah, no, that's a good point. Let's put that number 3, but number 1, are you assisting or are you creating goals, etc. So you can just have a little look through here. Centre forward, skipper was, and you've got a mission statement, which is quite nice. You want to live by that mission statement to be a leader of attack and convert as many scoring opportunities as possible. So we've got scoring and creating, 2 of the job roles for a centre forward. You've got super strength, breaking lines. So we're never losing sight of that super strength. We're going to make that really good, because ultimately that's why they're successful. So we have to focus on that as well. And then you can see through the 4 corners, we've got kick passing of both feet. So wants to really master different kick passes of both feet. We've got breaking ball. So working on different breaking ball when it gets knocked down from centre back, from midfielder, because it's an opportunity to be able to get back on the attack and break lines. Contact tackles, now we're looking at regains, but you can see for this player now, his ILP is, and we call it the zone of proximal development, he's not on level 1, he's mastered certain things now, so how do we make him even better? So kickouts, breaking ball kickouts, you've got different regains, they're the sort of things that are going to give him even more of an edge and become the top of the top, as opposed to now just thinking about, can you play it into the inside forward, can you break the line, etc., etc. And then we've got comfortable shooting with the left foot and free kicks, and put that on the Monday session, which was an individual based session. Tactical, then we're looking at decoy runs into the 4 forward. So now we're looking at unselfish runs, breaking lines, but without the ball, so that it creates space for either an inside forward to support underneath or for a midfielder to exploit the space. We've got the timing runs of the 4 forward line. So looking at the timing and interlink of the inside forward, of the centre forward, of the wing forward, looking at now how they move and interact with each other to create good space. And then you've got receiving ball centrally. So attack the man and goal, receiving ball wide, reverse pass and spin. So now you've got specific things that he's working on if the ball's centrally and the ball wide. So you can see it's just moved on another level. Physically improved speed over 10 metres. And times and places where they can do it. And then we've got his aerobic fitness was good, so we want to let him keep working on some aerobic work on a 5K run and get the time down by 45 seconds. And then we've got some psychosocial in there, about leadership, about leading the forward line, and also helping new players come into it. So that just gives an idea of maybe a template and how it's presented to the player, and then how the interaction happens between player and staff to really get that program spot on. Okay, so how do we then implement these players' ILPs? So the physical ILPs, when you looked at the physical corner, some of them will be interlinked into the practices and to training and different unit work, but the more power, fitness, speed, they're done quite simply. So individual gym programs, and they can be appropriately progressed after a 6-week period, for example, or less or more, depending on how they're doing. But also the physical stuff that you can do on individual sessions away from the place that are prescribed, but also before and after training, etc., etc. For here, we need to allocate time around the training for supervised ILP or unit work. So we spoke on the podcast recently with Colin Nally about arrival activities. So it could be a case that when you have 15, 20 minutes when you arrive to work on your ILPs, and you let players lead that and coaches facilitate that. Or it could be that within the session, we're going to do 20 minutes of unit work. So this coach is going to take the back line, and they're going to work on the ball being transferred across and looking at positioning and locking on. And it could be another coach takes the forward line and works on their movement and rotation to get scores and shots off. And another coach works on midfielders catching high ball, for example. But you have to have time where you're catering for this specific unit work as part of the job spec, but also the individual programs as well. And then I've put specific individual work given on days off away from training ground. Typically at club level, even at intercounty level in London, you know, we only had the boys training 2 times a week plus 1 team gym session. It wasn't enough. So we would say, right, on this day, it's typically a day off, on a Thursday or on a Monday or whatever it is, you're going to do an ILP session or some technical basic core skills, because we need you to work on that. But you also need to do a little bit of speed work in there, and then we want you to finish on some finishing, for example, some scoring, and you give them a prescribed session to do, so that they're not just going off and it fits into the load, the whole load program, etc. But it's specific to what the player needs. If a player needs a lot of tactical work, them sitting down and just doing some extra analysis on looking at the best of the best, or looking at yourself even, and saying, right, I want you to create me a half-an-hour playlist of when the defence were under pressure, what was the wing defender doing, the right wing back doing when the ball's on the left-hand side. Have a look at yourself, have a look at elite clips, for example, and then come back to me and let me know what you did. It's all part of the learning, it's all part of the training. So you can be really creative with those ILP sessions away from the club. And then the last one I put on there is training sessions. We need to design training sessions where we're so confident that every player is getting their individual programs in it, that even if they didn't do the additional unit work, which they do need to do, they're still improving as players and understanding how to improve and what they're working on. So you need to make sure your training sessions have a real focus, which we spoke about in the in designing your training session on episode 1. Here's just an example of one of the weeks that I put on the last week's presentation. And as you can see, Monday is an ILP session. So whether that's pitch or gym, it's independent session. Depending on what your player needs to work on, you can get really creative in that. Tuesday, we have an opportunity where the team train to do unit work, to do ILP work, and make sure the session is catering for certain individuals. Now, not every individual is going to get every job spec out of every session, for sure. You might have a focus on, I want to work on defending as an individual and defending as a team in a session. So the defensive type players are going to get more here. But when you work on defending, you also have to work on some attacking, because they're going to be going against defenders. So you will get some in every session, but it won't be geared towards all players. But over the course of a few weeks and the season, you need to make sure that every player has good opportunity to get what they need from the sessions. You've got Wednesday as well, where it's a team gym, but even the team gym, you have individual programs, etc. So they're all working on specific things in the gym with an individual program. And then you've got opportunity to work on individual bits in the session on Thursday. And obviously the game on Saturday, and a recovery day Fridays, off Friday, recovery day Sunday. So you've got 4 opportunities off the bat there to really make sure players are working on their individual programs. Okay, and then come into the last little bit then, talking about reviewing a player's individual program. So number one, I've put coach's journal. Like I think all coaches and potentially all support staff should have their own journal where they record everything with notes, what went well, who done well, what did you get out of it. And I'm going to give you a little example of one of my training sessions I do with the 15s here. Coaching sessions. I'll show you that at the end. But I think it's good to have good practice for a coach to have a journal that you're reflecting on constantly, and most importantly, thinking about what is each player going to get out of this session. Then we have the players' journal. Now, especially with senior teams and senior club players who work hard, I can understand how this is hard to buy in, and we had the issue at London as well, but you have to make it part of the culture. All right, so you buy them all. If you can, expensive through the club, but you buy them all a little pad, little A5 pad, couple of quid each, buy them in bulk at the local supermarket or stationery shop or whatever, and you give it to them with their name on. And every session, you tell them to write down what the session was as a whole. So, but they don't have to be descriptive in the session and just repeat what's going to be in your journal, but they answer these 4 questions. What was in it for me? So in the practice, what did I get out of the practice? Now they know their individual programs. They've been told the job specs. So what was in it for them? What did they do well? What could they have done better? So now they're starting to reflect on what they're doing well, what they think, what could they have done better, and what could the coach done better. So now you're saying, well, in that practice, if the coach changed this, I would have got more out of it for me. And then the coach might say, I understand that, but I wanted to work on this, so thanks, but next time we do it, maybe, etc. That's the sort of conversations you're getting from those journals. But then the staff have to divvy it up amongst them, amongst the selectors and coaching staff, read the journals and make sure that the detail that they're writing is good. So on that detail of the job spec, have they got that understanding and that knowledge? If not, then you're probing them on the detail. But also that they're reflecting appropriately on their learning. And I don't care what age you get to, how good you get to in the game, these sort of things are just going to make you even better. Then I've got 6-week formal reviews. So it's important that you take the time every 6 weeks to have a sit down, 10 minutes with every player. You'd be informally reviewing things on game days and training and giving debriefs, but it's important you give one-to-one in a calm, controlled environment to sit down and chat with each player. So whether you do this before training nights, whether you attend a gym session and pull like players out of their gym session for 10 minutes, that's the way we did it at London. Also before and after training, a few players each night. And it's an opportunity to really look at the RPs, get some feedback from the player as well as the journals, and also give your feedback so you can tell them where you think they are, and you tweak the program. So if they are getting better at certain things, then you can change the program slightly and you come to an agreement on that. So if their focus was 1v1 defending and they start to master that, then now you're talking about their positioning within a team function and how good they are within a shape, etc. And you're hoping that the zone of proximal development shifts. So that's just the zone of, ability of learning that the player can have. So if their job spec is defend within a team function, but they can't defend as an individual, then you have to work on number one before you move into the psychosocial, the communication side, the tactical side of spatial awareness on the pitch, etc., etc. So you're kind of shifting the player's program as they go through their development. And then, as I said, this is just an example from me. So it's football, it's soccer. So we probably did all these sessions with the London lads, which obviously just tweaked it slightly. But you can see it's a complete mess. But when I look back now and I do my reviews on people, on 2, 3, 4 week reviews, I've got notes every session. I know who's been good in that session, how the session went. I've got little pockets of stuff around different players. So here, the back four were very good. That certain player definitely needs work, but needs to support the first defender and stop the ball being played through the heart. I've got that player, YY, good movement, but drops too deep, so he needs to play as a 9. So you start to I've got BC good with a tick, and I know that's good because when he got the ball, he drove at the heart of defence because that's one of his RPs we're working on at the time. So this is the sort of thing you've got. So that then when you go down to do the 6-week review, you look back at your notes, you go, yeah, through these sessions, and obviously you've got your game notes as well. I know that, I know this player's either doing well at his job spec or is not. Okay, brilliant. And then the last one for me, just a summary. So I think it's essential that you have clear job roles and RPs for every player, regardless of age. Even if you had an under 10, you were managing an under 10s team and you gave them 2 things to work on: basic ball handling and master the hop, for example, or master the hop and solo every 4 steps, for example, because that's what they need to work on. Or if someone's mastered that, can you teach them their passing over 15 yards into chest or into space, for example? Yeah, so you're not going to go into too much detail, but if every player had a little bit about them and then you spoke to them about their development, it would mean the world to that player and they would start really investing time in their development. And obviously, as you get higher up the pyramid to senior level, then it becomes more advanced, more specific, and more detailed. Make yourself and your coaching team accountable for developing these players. So with the programs you put in place, the schedules, make sure there's time to work on them. Make sure you've told the players what their programs are and you review them, which I'll speak to in a minute. Make sure your training sessions are good enough to be able to stand up to work on the job spec of these players, job specs in their positions, etc. And make yourself really accountable. If a player doesn't develop or improve the way you want them to improve, make sure you've done everything you can to improve that player and what they needed to work on. Journals for staff and players, I think, are important. Reflection all round. I'm massive on reflection, but not just reflection on, no, yeah, I thought the session went well, we moved the ball around. No, specifically, did you get the outcomes? Did you give enough focus on the inside man's movement to receive and his playing back to play? Did you give him enough opportunity to shoot at goal if you want to improve his scoring ability, etc., etc.? And it's also essential that you review the programs. All right, so you review the programs over time, tweak them, change them for the player, etc., etc. Perfect. Okay, brilliant. Well, thank you very much for attending number 3. As I said earlier, I'm going to change the baton over after this to Joe and Kieran, who are going to do some stuff around tactical, setting up a team tactically and a bit of insight on that. Hope you got a bit more out of that. I'll then come back with the physical corner, maybe a 2-part, depending on how much info I try and get in the presentation. I don't want to get it too long, but around the physical corner, and then we finish off with Kieran on the environment and creating a good culture. So hope you enjoyed that. Again, any feedback welcome. It really does help, negative or positive, to improve the next one or the next course that we run. But yeah, cheers guys. Thank you very much.